All right, New Testament readers, it is week 40. This is a genuinely big number. We are getting through the New Testament. Even though it seems like there's a lot of books ahead, a lot of them are very small books. So we're going to get through this thing. And you've read a lot already. Let me just encourage you, if you haven't done this before and you've got something that you'd like to say, tell us how this experience is going. Use that email address in particular that's in the weekly emails because that'll be seen by several members of the staff. Just share what you're learning, how you're growing, how you've been challenged. We'd love to hear that from you, and we're going to be soliciting that as we come through the summer and near the end of the program. Now, this week we're going to wrap up Ephesians, which is one of Paul's prison letters. This letter, I think we can say, was written to help Christians understand their lives and their hardships and their difficulties in light of the gospel. And it's written with a very general application, not to a specific circumstance the way most of Paul's letters are, but probably written to circulate among a number of churches. So Paul's imprisonment has prompted a lot of Christians really to intensely question their faith. You know, if Paul can be imprisoned this way, and I'm suffering too, life is full of temptation and difficulties, we're swimming upstream in the world that we're in. Is this really God's stuff? Well, Paul says, yes, this is the means by which God is fulfilling his eternal plan, and a plan that is based on Christ, the Christ who has given his life for our sakes. We are a church consisting of sinners who have been saved by grace. We are built together as people with wide differences from every nation to become one temple, the dwelling place of the Spirit, and listen to that big biblical theme there, because temple has been the story of the Bible from Eden forward. This is one of the great things about the Bible Project, is it helps us understand this if you're watching those videos. So even Paul's lowly imprisonment in Ephesians is part of that gospel of lowliness. This is how God is doing his work in lowly people who are often suffering but are sustained by God. So what should we do? Chapter 4, live a life worthy, or a life fitting the calling with which you've been called. Your life should fit the gospel. That means you serve other people. You seek unity with other people. You give up dishonesty and cruelty, and you're like Christ. You live in love for other people, serving and supporting other people. This includes in the household. And so Paul has this household table in Ephesians. We'll see it also in Colossians, which may have been kind of the first draft of this letter, as it were. So he says to fathers and husbands, to wives and mothers, to children, and even to slaves, whatever your position is, whether you have power or whether you're in a lowly position according to social convention in this place, you should submit to one another in the fear of Christ, meaning out of respect for the way Christ gave himself for you, give yourself for others. So love your wives, love your children, submit to your husbands. Slaves, submit to your masters, not because you're afraid of them, but because of the Lord. And masters, oh, this is revolutionary. Treat your slaves like brothers and sisters. Well, you can't really enslave people if they're your brothers and sisters, right? So it's a marvelous discussion there that really stands in contrast to a lot of things that were going on in Paul's time, even though it's dealing with the household as it existed at the time with the usual social structures and expectations. Well, there's a tension in your life as a Christian. It's the tension of opposition from dark spiritual forces of evil. These principalities and powers that Paul writes about in Ephesians, these are understood, rightly, as the spiritual powers which empower human powers to do the evil that they do. In other words, we're thinking of the spiritual powers that would inhabit the empire or other powerful, wealthy things by which humans exploited other humans. Well, what do we do with that? We understand that God has fully armed us against that struggle. Okay, and we rely on him in that, especially in prayer. Let's move on now to Philippians. I've talked too long about Ephesians. Philippians is another prison letter, and it's addressing a church where people aren't getting along because they're selfish. You know, this is the usual problem. So Paul, throughout this letter, is going to use the example of Christ, the Christ of the cross, as the central element of our faith and say, you've got to live that way. So in chapter 1, he's going to be showing us how he lives that way as a prisoner. In chapter 2, how Timothy and Epaphroditus have lived that way, and we ought to have the mind of Christ. In chapter 3, how the enemies of the cross, people who are selfish or who are concerned with their own power, are to be rejected. And in all of this, what he says in chapter 2, verses 6 to 11 is central, that Christ did not, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God something to use for his own advantage, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. There it is. That's what we live by, folks. Those are the words. Okay? That's the story. Enjoy your reading this week.